thank all of you for being here, and it is my sincere honor and excitement to introduce to you our special guest and author, Alice Randall. Alice Randall is a New York Times best-selling novelist, award-winning songwriter, educator, food activist, and now memoirist. A graduate of Harvard University, she holds an honorary doctorate from Fisk University, is on the faculty at Vanderbilt University, and credits Detroit's Ziggy Johnson School of the Theater with being the most influential educational institution in her life. She is widely recognized as being one of the most significant voices in 21st century African American fiction, the only Black woman in history to write both a #1 country song, X's and O's, and an ACM Video of the Year, Is There Life Out There, starring Reba McEntire. Please welcome Alice Randall.
So excited to be with DJ, Soul Sister, and the brilliant Melissa, archivist.
Well, thank you, but full disclosure, okay, so we're here to talk about your work and your book, My Black Country, A Journey Through Country Music's Black Past, Present, and Future. And when I started reading the book, I thought it was going to be all musicology, and it is part musicology and part memoir. And one of the deep things that you said in the book when you were telling a story, you said it was time to change the room. Tell us why this book at this time and changing the room.
When I first came to Nashville 40-some years ago to write country music, I remember one of the first people I met with put his feet up in the desk and said, you need to go back to wherever it is you came from. And that I got songs recorded in the 80s, 90s, 0s, 10s, and 20s, but when Black Bottom Saints came out and people wanted to play my old songs, I couldn't bear to listen to them. I didn't enjoy that room because all of the erasure that had happened of my lives of my brown and black cowboys were out of it. So it was time to change the room, and with this album, invite more Black and brown faces to the party, and also invite everyone who was already loving country music to understand that it was from the 17th century an Afro-Celtic form, that before it was recorded, it had Celtic, Black, and evangelical Christian influences, and in the early days of its recording, there was a lot of Black presence. So it was trying to change the room so the room knew what it was talking about and listening to.
Tell us about the history of Black country music and how you became interested, because you detail this in your book, and I couldn't put it down. Why Black country?
Well, all country is actually Black country, because there are two great working definitions that I work with in country music. And I'm the Andrew W. Mellon Chair in the Humanities at Vanderbilt University, so I like a little bit of theory. I don't only like theory, but is that it's English, Irish, and Scottish ballad forms plus African influences plus evangelical Christianity. All that together makes country. If you don't have the Black influences, you may have a folk song. If you don't have the evangelical Christianity, you may have a blues. If you have the Black influences and the evangelical Christianity, but no English, Irish, and Scottish ballad form, you may have a gospel song. It takes all three of them. From the English, Irish, and Scottish ballads, we get a storytelling impulse, a narrative impulse, and also a history-telling influence, because the early ballads, 18th century ballads, told the history of the times. So in my, I have the Ballad of Sally Ann, and it's talking about lynching, but that's actually going from that Celtic tradition. When we talk about African influences in country, the most obvious is the banjo, the instrument, which has roots from all over the African continent. And it's invented in these Americas, drawing from northern and southern, eastern and western African influences to create one singular new instrument, the banjo. But it also is the influence of African sense of sacred place, ancestor worship, these things we see in country. And then the evangelical Christianity gives it hope. It's different than the blues. Because of the Christianity, the idea is there's hope, because even if you don't get what you want in this world, you'll get it in heaven. And so that's one of the things I love about country, is the part of it that has the audacity of hope in it. Another way is to look at Harlan Howard, the great country songwriter, a white man from Michigan, said that country was 3 chords in the truth. By that he meant the music was simple, but the stories were complex. I say that country is 3 chords and 4 very particular truths. And those are: life is hard, God is real, the road, liquor, and family are significant compensations, and the past is better than the present. The past is better than present is the racial fault line in a lot of country, but that will get us right to the 17th century. Who knew better that past was better than the present than a newly enslaved African on the Virginia or Maryland shore? They were looking back to a longed for and lost Africa before colonization. In contemporary country, the past that's better than the present now can sometimes be a longed for and lost mythologized Dixie. In the best of all country, it's sort of Wordsworthian. The past that's better than the present is a happy childhood that happened when some grandma, some auntie, somebody protected you against all odds from the poverty in rural West Virginia or Mississippi. So life is hard, that's real. God or spirit is real. Road, liquor, family are compensations. Past is better than the present. And all of that is highly at work in Beyonce's, her wonderful Texas Hold'em. Because one of the things that's interesting, I'll just give it, but about Texas Hold'em, remember that first rule, God is real? Texas Hold'em is all about life not being a game. Texas Hold'em is a poker game. That song is about life is not a game, God is real.
Wow. You mentioned truths. So speaking of truths, your book is also memoir. And you talk about your life, truths, some maybe painful memories. Talk to us about why you incorporated the memoir aspect and also your personal connection and introductions to country.
Thank you for asking that question. One of it is, I like the aesthetics of a braid. Being a little girl that used to wear pigtails, like braids. So it is a braided narrative of the history of Black people in country music from the 17th century to the present. A business history of my life in country music. And the third is my personal reasons why I love country so much. You already have a sense of the history. About the business history, I talked about that yesterday a lot at Loyola College, because it was Entrepreneur Week. When I came to Nashville in 1983 to find I came to make a fortune and to write country songs, because I wanted to be a novelist. And I thought I would write and publish country songs to support my serious novel writing, and that strange plan worked. That company still exists, Midsummer Music. In its best years, over time, it has earned over 7 figures. It has done well. I now I'm president of the company again, and it's sole owner again. Originally, there were 2 other co-owners. At times, I owned less and less of it, and at one point, none of it, and it's been restored to me. I did, one of the people I published when I was starting off was Garth Brooks. You may have heard of him. So one, it is a business history. So one, I wanted to document and remind people that the year before Motown Records was formed, I was born in the same year and city as Motown Records. Berry Gordy founded Motown in '59. The year before, Anna, his sister, formed Anna Records. And I've known that all my life. So I knew about Black women using music as a wealth engine as well as an art engine, and I wanted control of my own art. So, considering that man told me I need to go back to where I was coming from, I did not think the great Acuff Rose was going to publish me. So, I named Midsummer Music after Midsummer Night Dream, one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. And I went to Nashville as a black woman newly out of Harvard. Now, and it worked. But the beginning, back in 1959, is I say that country music was the only thing my mother, my grandmother, and my favorite aunt loved in common. It should have been me, but my mama did not love me. And I mean that. And you can, if you read my book, I truly had a mother that did not love me. And so that's how I learned life was hard. I remember hearing that wonderful blues song, Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child a Long, Long Way from Home. And I didn't know why the person sounded so sad, because a motherless child a long way from home sounded like the safest thing you could be. And that's when I realized my childhood wasn't like everyone else's. So I was drawn to country because my grandmother, who was from Alabama, a black woman from Alabama, used to sing me country on her lap. Will the circle be unbroken? She'll be coming round the mountain. My mother would sneak. My mother was a black woman raised in a black family in an all-white Michigan farming village in a German Lutheran town. She's the only black kid at her all-white German Lutheran school. So she came by her trauma honestly. But she learned in that little village to sneak out and listen to the hillbilly radio. She was raised on Hank Williams, like all the other kids in her village. So she would sneak and listen to country in the laundry room. And my my aunt, Mary Frances, she loved Ray Charles, the albums. She wore out modern sounds and country and Western music, dancing around the living room of her house in Detroit with me. So by the time, when I was 3 years old, I'll stop and tell you this story. I had a very unusual and wonderful father. I like to say he taught me some hellacious daddy lessons, and that's my favorite Beyonce country song. My father one day, we were sitting outside of a door, and the dark was falling, and he was leaving me in the car, and he said, I'll be back before the hands get on the clock to this point where he pointed. And I knew he would be, because he always was. But this time it was getting a little dark, it was getting a little cold, and I didn't want to be left alone in the car. And I looked at these letters hanging in the sky, and I said, Daddy, don't go in that B-A-R. And he said, I have been leaving you outside of too many bars if you're spelling that word out to me. So he took me in the bar with him and got a drink. Fast forward. In the house where I was growing up, there was a beautiful yard and garden on all sides of it, including 5 fruit trees on the left of the house. And I would sit up in that cherry tree on the side, and with a little jar of maraschino bar cherries tied to my wrist, and eat cherries, because my family told me the birds poo-pooed on the cherries on the tree, so I didn't eat them. And I would sing to the birds. And originally I was singing to them songs I heard on the radio, songs I heard on the album, songs my grandmother sang. And one day, and I cannot sing, I started singing, Daddy, don't go in that B-A-R. Please don't leave me alone in the car. I'm wishing on a something star. Daddy, don't go in that B-A-R. That was my first country song. I took it down to Nashville with me when I arrived in 1983. And 2 years later, I had my first real country song recorded at Reckless Night.
I'm glad you sang that. I was going to ask what that song sounded like.
And I truly cannot sing.
You just mentioned the song you wrote inspired by that instance with your father, and so much with your family, and the challenging relationship with your mother. I know the word you used for separation was kidnapping. Was it hard to be open in this way, coming out of fiction and novels?
It's interesting. This is, I think, my 9th book. I have 2 that are co-written with my daughter, Caroline Williams. But I have 5 novels. You may know The Wind Done Gone. It was a black retelling of Gone with the Wind. I got to come to the Tennessee Williams Festival that year, 2001, to New Orleans with that book. It was a New York Times bestseller. I've told in fiction the story of being kidnapped by my mother. I have talked about the trauma. I actually was very happy. I'm 65, about to be 66 years old, particularly to tell this story because I got to hard won happy. I like to say, I make sane like you make a bed every day. I make art like I make sane every day. And in that way, that what is too hard to bear becomes beauty that makes the hard bearable. When I was wondering if I could get over a crazy mother who tried to kill me, put me in the hospital, and a very successful, beautiful woman, that was fraternizing, this is all happening in fancy houses and beautiful rooms and with, A-list names. I always know, when the Quilted Giraffe closed in New York, my mother was invited to the last dinner. I knew when I broke with her, I would not have as much fun in life, but because she was a lot of fun. But my mother was, I wanted to tell this story that I didn't hear. When a little bit of Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. When I was a little girl, and when I was a young woman, when I was at Harvard, there wasn't a lot of literature about whether you really could get over a mother like mine. Because even Maya Angelou had a mother that loved her when she talks about rape and things. I had a mother who actually did not love me and who actually spent some of her life wanting to destroy me. She was very smart. I remember one, and so I did it as witness to every little girl or boy or person out there who's had to endure that and say, yes, I have found mothers in the world, imagined and real. Lil Hardin was an imaginary mother for me. Emily Dickinson was an imaginary mother for me. I found mentors who mothered me. And for me, my greatest redemption was in being a mother of Caroline. But so, by the time I told it, and the only thing I don't want to do, I was afraid of telling it, was only for this reason, that most people that have parents who are as abusive as mine was, don't, as I said to my mother one day, they end up in jail or dead. They end up literally, they commit suicide or they harm other people and they end up in jail. So I didn't want anyone who didn't have my outcome, who didn't have the opportunity to have all the therapy I had, that didn't have the profoundly loving parents I had, and that daddy who was so raggedy and right, and I do tell that story, and I tell it better in fiction, read Rebel, Yell, or Pushkin and the Queen of Spades. I knew that justice was only a phone call away. The unrecorded countries, I knew that if I ever called my father, actually, I'll stop and tell this story that I didn't put in the book. When my daughter was born, my father came to visit me, and he was wearing this all black pants and silk shirt and a red mohair sweater, looking like the very, dandy black man from Detroit he was, petting the baby in Arna Bontemps' living room. And he said, I've been watching Oprah, and it comes to my attention your mother may have abused you. I didn't say anything. And he asked me again. He said, did your mother abuse you? And I said, yes. And he said, why didn't you tell me? And I said, because you would have killed her or had her killed. And he said, that's all I would have known how to do. And I said, so I had no one. And we cried over it and mended. And I have come to living of knowing that's why I could get over my mother. I knew justice was a phone call away. I knew that I actually was this amazing person who does not believe in the death penalty, believed in mercy, and kept on trying to work with her until I didn't. So I think the truth is a liberation. And I think that anyone writing a memoir, you can't write it until you've processed it all and you are offering what you think is good for your readers. And that's why I didn't tell that story in the book, because I think most readers didn't have that kind of ally.
Wow. You mentioned a few moments ago Lil Hardin, who plays a major role in your life and in the book. For those who don't know who Lil Hardin is, let's talk about her.
Well, in New Orleans, I want to say she is Louis Armstrong's second wife and the woman who actually, the person who helped position him in the jazz pantheon. She changed his approach to his instrument. She actually was trained in classical music at Fisk University, where she attended for 3 years. She was and she invented his stage presence and costumes, built many of his suits, died on a piano bench playing St. Louis Woman in honor of Louis right after he died. She literally died sitting at the piano, playing in honor of him. But Lil and Louis played on Blue Yodel number 9, the first million-selling country record in 1930. That's the Jimmie Rodgers classic. And on the little shellac disc, it says Jimmie Rodgers and Orchestra. They don't mention that the orchestra is Louis Armstrong and Lil Hardin Armstrong. 3 geniuses play on that record. That Johnny Cash, Roy Acuff, everyone agrees this is the most seminal country song of all time, the one from which all the others are rooted. 1930, recorded in Los Angeles. 2 black geniuses are on that record. That's that erased history. That even as late as I don't know how many of you have seen the Ken Burns documentary, Country Music. Raise your hand if you've seen that. I was a scholar on that the whole time. The kick-off dinner for the whole project happened in the house I bought with Windong money. And the whole time we were working, I fought when they were telling the Blue Yodel story for the inclusion of Lil and Louis in it. And the other main scholar, whose name I'm not going to even call right now, from University of Texas, he fought back until I won in the end, because I was able to show a scholar out of Duke that found the sheet music in Jimmie Rodgers' own hand, and Louis' wife Lil played piano. And to get the rest of the story of that, I found on YouTube the Louis Armstrong Johnny Cash interview in the late 60s describing the day. Proved that they're both on it. But Ken Burns only included Louis because they said in the time they had to tell the story, no one would believe it. No one would believe it. It's true, but no one would believe it because it always been told that this is the hillbilly classic, and hillbilly has to be white. And I point out, even you look at West Virginia, nothing in Appalachia is snow white, not even the snow that comes dusted with coal. And about 30% of coal miners, including Bill Withers' family, in West Virginia were black. So that is, I love Lil Hardin. She is not only on that first Blue Yodel number 9, but in about 1931-32, Louis and Lil are sitting in Detroit at a Black and Tan, and they hear this really amazing jazz musician and tell him about country. That's Herb Jeffries. They send him up to Chicago to Earl Father Hines, and he will become the Bronze Buckaroo. All through the 30s and early 40s, making black singing cowboy westerns that are also monuments to the black and brown singing cowboys who create the whole opus of cowboy songs that influence early country and western music. People forget so many of those songs were written by black and brown people. So Lil is not only, giving us Herb Jeffries, playing on Jimmie Rodgers. 1959, year I was born, Ray Charles has a #1 with Lil Armstrong's song, Just for a Thrill. He's dealing with Lil a lot with that #1. 2-3 years later, she's talking to him about country. He puts out modern sounds in country and western music, which Willie Nelson has said is the greatest country album of all time. When George Jones says, so Lil is the mama of country and black country. I say DeFord Bailey, the Opry's first star, is the papa. Ray Charles is their genius child. Herb Jeffries is Lil's stepchild. And country is cornbread Charlie Pride, who your mama tried to get you to go to the show and you would not go. Country is cornbread Charlie Pride is DeFord's side child because he's straight from her, Dee Ford is the first black member of the Opry, and Charlie Pride is the second.
Yeah. Wow. So the story she just told, I shared with her earlier in the week. In 1984, when the World's Fair came to New Orleans, and I'm about 10 years old, my mother grew up loving country music, and especially Charlie Pride. And Charlie Pride played at the amphitheater at the World's Fair, and she wanted me and my dad to go with her, and we were like, no, we don't want to listen to country music. And she went by herself. So let's talk about
Mama,
this.
raise your hand. I know you're out in the audience.
Yay, hi, Mom.
Thank you for representing the long-established black audience for country. Thank you.
So now I know better, right? And my mom raised me right.
Ancestor worship is an important part of country and black experience, I like.
Yeah, and your book challenges these creation stories that erase black voice and creation. And you do it with detailed research, primary source research, archival research. Talk to us about the research work that went into this book.
A lot. One, say the Leslie Riddle story. Everyone, typically when the story is told of the birth of country, Jimmy Rogers is the father. I've already told you about a little bit of his black influences. And Mother Maybelle, the Carter family, is the mama. But please read it in the book. And I love the Carter family. I am really good friends with Rosanne Cash. I actually had my book opening with Rosanne Cash in the Brooklyn Public Library in conversation with Rosanne. But Mother Maybelle lived down the street from a man called Leslie Riddle. Leslie Riddle lost a leg when he's in his teens in a cement accident. Then, in what might have been a suicide attempt, he lost 2 fingers in a gunshot, right, in a firearms accident. Leslie Riddle played with 3 fingers. Carter family scratch involves 3 fingers. We know that they got these early songs and melodies from Leslie Riddle. They called him Leslie Riddle. Maybe, weirdly, concurrently, both of them are starting ridiculously independently to play the guitar the very same way. Or did the Carter family scratch really belong to Leslie Riddle? What we do know for sure is the Carter family told a lot of lies about him. They say his name was really Leslie, and he was called Leslie because their children couldn't pronounce his name. Well, I found him long before they met the Carters in the census with the name Leslie. And anyway, there's so much to this. So I use all kinds of black newspapers to build out stories. I use the History Makers archives. I use YouTube archives, which are really been fun to find those early Johnny Cash, early television shows that might have interviews. So much to chase down, basically the showbiz gossip I have been raised with in Black Detroit. And I also have, one funny thing is, the first time the Supremes played the Copacabana, you talked about your World's Fair. Well, mine was 1964 World's Fair, and my family took me up there, and the Supremes played the Copacabana, and I was ringside in this little pink dress my aunt had made for me, and they sang a country song. They sang Queen of the House. They not only sang it, they slightly rewrote it to include the lyric, got a new wig to wear. And that song became Country Song of the Year in the awards, but the Supremes were part of raising it up to that. And that's proof that in 1964, the first black young act to play the Copacabana was aware of country and putting its fingerprints on country. But this gets ignored. And of course, your own Aaron Neville took the grand tour, one of George Jones's best songs ever, and eclipses that extraordinary performance with an even more extraordinary performance.
Even with all of the evidence that you lay out in the book of black involvement and creation of country music, there is still a stigma with black popular music listeners and country. And there's a stigma with white gatekeepers in country with black people. Please talk to us about the stigmas in both.
There are so many complex stigmas, but let's go back to that banjo, which we should all be celebrating as an artifact that is proof of Black genius and innovation and of cultural disruption in the transatlantic slave trade, but coming to this creation of an instrument. But with the rise of minstrel shows after this Civil War and the racist degradations of Black people with the imageries in the minstrel shows, Black people put the banjo down. And we also put the banjo down because Black aesthetics privilege innovation. We privilege going to the new in America. We privilege going to the new territory. So both for the reasons of the banjo is being used in minstrel shows to foster coon imagery and violent buck imagery. We put the banjo down, but we're losing Scott Joplin's mama, who was an extraordinary banjo player. Allison Russell, Rhiannon Giddens are not the first brilliant Black women to play the banjo. But we've erased the earlier ones. So I think that there is degradation. My own father, when I told him I was going, you can find this in a Los Angeles Times front page article. When I told him I was going to go become a country songwriter and publisher, he would tell people, I graduated from Harvard, he had been glad of my graduation. I was some kind of authority on 17th century Puritan sermons and mothers and daughters in the novels of Jane Austen. When I decided to go do this, when people would ask him, what is Alice doing? All he would say was, it's one step better than prostitution and one step less than prostitution and one step better than drug dealing. And then wouldn't say what I was doing. That's what he thought about country music, because he said it created the soundtrack to lynchings. But which is true. I bet you a lot of people riding to lynchings listened to, sang what we call country songs. But also a lot of Black women creating transcendence for their families, sang and listened to country songs and wrote them themselves. But that history is not documented. So I look for the part that is the genius and innovation. And it's also just one of the great American stories. Country only exists because of Black, white, and gold genius. Indigenous people contributed to it through the Vancaros and through Chinese railroad workers who died laying the tracks with Black men of the railroad that connected the east to the west coast. But those rhythms of those men, and they were men, infused country, infused the John Henry songs. And indigenous Vancaros and other indigenous cowboys contribute to the cowboy song lexicon. And as I said, it wouldn't exist without the English, Irish, and Scottish ballad forms and these African influences. So country, I even say this in New Orleans, rivals jazz as an American music form that frames Black genius. But we have not been allowed to take our place in the country story, because country came to mean, in these United States, America. Who can sing country becomes a surrogate question for who can be a real American. And so that's why I do say Beyonce can sing country, because she is a real American.
I was inspired by so many stories that you told. You've overcome. It's like overcoming so many things. And one of the stories you tell is why you were inspired to finally move to Nashville to start this career, and an ASCAP member read, or looked at one of your songs and wrote you a letter that said, "You have no talent whatsoever."
Right? And that's when I decided to move to Nashville. That was that guy who first told me to go back to where I come from. The next part of that meeting was, he said, well, maybe it's been so long since I've met anyone at this early or raw stage of development, I wouldn't recognize it. And he said, I'm going to show your lyrics to some of my young writers. And he picked one of them was Mark D. Sanders. And he wrote me a letter when I got back to Washington, D.C., where I was living then. And he said, I showed your lyrics to 3 writers, and they all agreed, you have no talent whatsoever. And so that's literally the day I decided I was moving to Nashville, Tennessee. And fast forward, I was at a party shortly. I probably moved in the spring. I think it was March, February, March. And there's something called the Weenie Roast. I was at the Weenie Roast, and I was talking to this really smart young man. He's from California, and loved some of the same Western writers. I like Steinbeck and talking about that in country. And he said, we should write together. And I said, no, we shouldn't write together. He said, why not? I said, because I have no talent whatsoever. And he said, you shouldn't talk about yourself that way. I said, I didn't talk about myself that way. You're the one who said it. And he said, you're that girl? I said, yes, I'm that girl. And you know, the second song we ever wrote, the first one was horrible. I still remember it. I don't want to be your only one, because I wasn't going to give him any of my good ideas. This mofo said I had no talent whatsoever. I'm not an idiot. So I gave him those idiotic ideas I had ever come up with. He might have, I don't want to be your number one. I want to be your one and only one. But he proved himself on that first one. And the second song we wrote was a song called Reckless Night. And it was about religious hypocrisy. It was about slut-shaming before slut-shaming was a phrase. It's about a church. And a girl and a boy fell in love in that church, and the girl gets pregnant, and he's still singing in the choir, and she has been pushed out into the courtyard with her child. She rocks her baby in the cool moonlight, the legacy of a reckless night. She rocks her baby in the cool moonlight. And it says, deep inside the church, a choir is singing songs of sweet forgiveness for mankind. Her lover stands within, believing God's forgiven him and cleansed him of a sin will always hide. Well, if you were like me and you studied those Puritan sermons, you know you don't get forgiven for sins that you always hide. So he was just condemned. And we had some Edward Taylor, rain falling down on her, and that's God's love. And that's a secular humanistic God, evangelical Judeo-Christian God, and that was an African nature God raining all over that girl and the baby. And that was a B-side of a #1 record, back when the Forrester Sisters, so that was fun.
You know, through the book, I have this term that I use called a nonconformista, meaning you do things your way and you don't care. And you clearly do things your way. And I don't get the sense from the book that you ever felt different or strange or other. You just did it because you were authentically you. But looking back, do you see, from your friends who were not listening to country, because you talk about going to dance to early rap music and disco and punk and doing things?
I went to the Curtis Blow show the night before I drove down to Nashville. No. When I moved to Nashville, none of my friends could believe I was going to move to Nashville. I do remind people it's a home of Fisk University, Tennessee State University, American Baptist College. Very cool, really interesting black community there. But my Harvard friends and the ones in the Jane, they did not get the country thing initially. I think remember I told you I sometimes that motherless child thing, I actually think I didn't feel othered, but I always felt different and original. But I also believe that everybody is different and original. That whole snowflake thing, I think it's good. It's a black snowflake, I imagine myself. I think everyone is original and different, and I like that. So I was the unexpected body in the room. I just wasn't I think that's that Detroit chin-up swagger. There's a lot of that in New Orleans, too. I just wasn't going to be denied. That I knew, particularly when it came to country music, I knew that black people had created the banjo and created most of what was amazing in country. And I was there to do the political work of getting our own back. And I felt that so many have been exploited economically around it. I was interested as an artist, because remember I wanted to write those books. I wanted to write The When Done Gone, Pushkin and the Queen of Spades. I didn't want to take my books into the marketplace. I wanted to just absolutely write the book I wanted to write. So I was willing, and I wanted to write popular songs because I wanted to change hardened hearts and minds. I did not want to preach to the converted. I did not want to be writing New Yorker poetry. I didn't want to be doing what I did when I wrote my thesis on mothers and daughters in the novels of Jane Austen. You had to know so much about Jane Austen, feminism, and structuralist criticism to even evaluate what I'd done. It was, put a lot of quotations around this, intellectual masturbation. It was relevant to 4 people besides me. I wanted to do something that just everyday people will feel illuminated by, that listening to the radio. Because to me, that was a more political work. And also, I could then make money to write the weird novels. I knew my novels were going to be weird, and they were. Well, and Pushkin and the Queen of Spades, I translate Pushkin's incomplete novel about his grandfather, the Afro-Russian Pushkin, into hip-hop language, specifically Tupac's language. That's a weird thing to do, but I love doing it. And I went out and hung out with Nas, and he sort of encouraged me.
Speaking of Nas, you start the book framing it in a situation that's contemporary with the contemporary artist. Talk to us about this new kind of explosion of contemporary black country artists.
I begin and end with that. That I said I was lucky enough I had songs recorded by people like Glenn Campbell and Trisha Yearwood in 2 weeks at #1, and wrote a video of the year for Reba McEntire, published Garth Brooks. I've been associated with some of the most, and helped launch Garth Brooks. I mean, I was part of the discovering of him. I bought him his first bottle of champagne. He never had champagne. And he carried, I think, the bed or the crib up to the guest room when I couldn't get someone to deliver it. When my baby was little, he said, I've got a back, I got a truck. He put what I needed, my furniture on his back, and carried up a flight of stairs. But that was very frustrating. I spent a decade, the first 20 years, trying to do this political work. And what I really succeeded was making a lot of white people successful and richer, including Mark D. Sanders. I love Mark. He's got a house out west, and a house in Hawaii now. When I got him, his first wife left him because he didn't have enough money. But I hadn't done the thing I wanted to do with black artists. And what I'm so thrilled that when I couldn't bear to listen to my old songs, Layla McCalla, who played with me yesterday, Allison Russell, Rhiannon Giddens with her Pulitzer Prize, Reese Palmer, the first black woman to be on the country chart since Linda Martell, Sonny War, Sister Strings, who plays with Joni Mitchell at the Grammys. These Allison Russell, Adia Victoria, they came riding to the rescue of my legacy. I have lived long enough. When I arrived in Nashville, Vince Gill, who I know, he said it's a young man's town. Even though you build it, sometimes you got to sit back and watch them burn it to the ground. I told Vince, it's a wild woman's town now, and these wild women that I just described to you, and Shabuzi, some men involved in it, they are remaking it and Beyonce herself have taken country into not since Ray Charles, deconstructed country and reimagined it, infused with jazz, with modern sounds in country and western. Has so much work been done aesthetically to liberate and elevate country. On an aesthetic level, Cowboy Carter is a template for how country will be reimagined for the next 15, 20 years. That is an extraordinary feat. It's an act of curation of the past, but it creates an entire model of new rhythms that can be in country. And it is a work of great injustice that the industry in Nashville does not recognize what she did. It is a great work of justice that the Grammy organization, the National Music Organization, gave her both Country Album of the Year and Album of the Year. And I was in the room. I didn't get my Grammy. I was nominated this year, Rihanna and I, that song. I was more thrilled as an old woman to see this day, Juneteenth, a family reunion in which the entire family is invited. That's what Cowboy Carter was to me. And I hope that's what My Black Country will be for y'all.
Yes, yes, indeed.
The whole family invited.
We are at time, so I just want to thank you for this work. Alice Randall, My Black Country. Please give her another round of applause, and I thank you.
DJ, so